Hello everyone, and welcome back to Introduction to Programming with Python. Today we're going to go over actually editing .py files, what a text editor is and a compiler, and then we'll actually get into some programming, starting off with what variables are and basic data types. So I'm going to start off by going to my search bar, typing IDE and opening this app right here, and I'm going to create a new file by doing Control and N. You can also go up here, File, New File, and this pops up. I'm going to save this on my desktop and call it Example. And it's going to pop up right there. So now this is the contents of the file right now. They're blank and empty, and this is where we can actually put in our code. And so you can think of this as the input where we actually write the code, and then when we compile the file and run it, the output is going to show here. So I'm going to start, for example, by typing out, I'll explain what this is in a little bit, but this is a function to display the word hello world onto the output screen. So I'm going to hit F5 to run it, and it's going to show up here. And so what this is called is an interpreter. And so whenever we save code here and press F5 to run it, all the code is going to be compiled and actually processed and run, and you see the result on this other window right here, this shell. And so, but what we're going to be doing today is I don't want to use this default editor. I'm going to be using something called Sublime Text, which is basically this. It's just it looks a little nicer, and we'll go through installing it right now. So I'm going to open up a Chrome tab. I'm going to type in Sublime Text Download. I'll go here, and I'm going to be installing this Windows 64-bit because I'm running a 64-bit version of my computer. And I'm going to open it. I'm going to go through installing this. Okay, so Sublime Text has been installed on my machine. I'm going to go here to open it up. And here we go. So again, this is where you can edit a file for code. So what I'm going to do is File, Open File, and I'm going to open that example Python file that I created right there. And so here's our file. Now in Sublime Text, the way you run code is by hitting Control B. We choose the interpreter. And this is where the output shows up. It's not its own separate window like it was in the default idle, but it just shows up here on the bottom of the screen. And so, as we can see, here is the final output. And now that we have that out of the way, let's actually get into some basic programming. And so now whenever one is programming within a programming language, this doesn't go for Python, but most other languages, we have to deal with data in some sort of way. So certain values like numbers and pieces of text and all that. And so we can work with them within this script. So I can have pieces of text like this. I can have integers. I can have decimals. And so the way we at least store them within Python and with other languages as well is we put them in variables. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable called myvar, and I'm going to set it equal to a piece of text, and I guess I'll say hello within this text. So what we've done here is we've defined a variable, and the way you do that within Python is you have the name of the variable, you assign it a value by putting down an equal sign, and then you give it the value that it's assigned to. So it's as if my var is a placeholder for this value right here, which is hello, and it's a piece of text. This is data. We can also have this for numbers and other stuff as well. So within programming, what this piece of text would be called is a string, and so a string is denoted as a piece of text, and anything can be in here. Even numbers can be in here, like this. In terms of integers, so you can have something like this. This is just called an integer. And then decimals, so something like 3.0, these are called floats. So these are the three basic types of data you can have within a programming script: the string, the integer, and the float. And they can all be assigned to variables like this. Now what we also have for Python is built-in operations that we can use to perform certain tasks. So as I showed earlier with that print, so within Python, this print function basically means whatever you put in between these parentheses, display it onto the output screen, like we did down here with Hello World. So I could come in here and I could tell it to print a string, and let's just say the string is apples, and I'll hit Control B to run that, and it prints apples to the output. I can also do this with other data types, like the integer 6. I'll run that, and it prints 6. Also with floats 6.0, just to prove that it works. Just like that, 6.0. So I will define another variable called myString. Also, there are certain rules when it comes to naming variables. So I'll have this equal to hello world again. When naming variables, you cannot start the variable with a number. You can have it anywhere else in the variable name. So I can have it over here, but if I were to try and do this, I'm going to get an error when I try and run the program. Syntax error, invalid syntax. And so we can also have underscores here, but we can't have dashes or any of these weird symbols. You're going to get an error when doing that. And we also can't have spaces like this. It has to be one consistent word when naming. So I'm going to have a variable called myString, and it holds the string hello world. And what I could also do is just print that variable. So I'm going to print myString. And what this is going to do is it's going to print the contents of that variable, which is hello world right here. Just like that. So if I come in and change this to an integer like 6, now if I print the variable, the 6 is going to be printed out to the screen just like that. So what I can also do is, let's say I have a variable with a string. This will be hello. I'll go ahead and create another string, so I'll name this myString2, and I'll have this equal to world. What we could also do is add these two strings together in what's called string concatenation. And so I can have myString3 equal to myString plus myString2. And now let's print this and see what it is. So I'm going to print the variable myString3, and we get hello world. So what this did is it combined the string hello and world to get hello world into one. And so you're able to do that as well. Now let's say I'm playing around with numerical values. So I have my int is equal to 6, and then I have another my int2 equal to 4, let's say. I could also do this, which is my int3 equal to my int plus my int2. And what we get here is the sum of those two, 10 right here. Now let's say I do something like this. Alright, so now these are strings. These are no longer integers. So when we try and print these, what we get is 64, which, you know, that might not make sense to some of you, and that's because these are no longer integers, right? Because integers actually, one of their attributes is to be added together with each other and actually produce an actual sum. But these are strings, these are pieces of text. And so within Python, when you add strings together, right, it actually just combines the two pieces of text together instead of actually adding the values. And so these aren't considered integers anymore, these are strings. And so that's important to note. Now if I remove the quotes, now they're back to being integers and they'll actually add to 10. I could also do a float here. Now if I add a float and an integer together, the sum is just going to be turned into a float, just like this, so it turns into a decimal. So let's say I have a variable called age, and it holds an age, let's say 10. And then I have a variable called name, and it holds the name Alex. Now what I could do is create a sentence like this. And I could say, what if I wanted to say Alex is 10 years old, but I would like to use, these actual variables within the sentence? Well, I could just add the strings together with the variable. So I could say the name, which is Alex, plus, is, and then add the age, years old. And now when I print sentence, oh, I misspelled that, sentence, I got an error here. Let's see, invalid syntax. We forgot a plus right here. Okay, so let's try and run this. And we get an error. We get a type error. Can only concatenate string, not int to string. So what are we trying to do here? Well, we're trying to combine the name Alex with the string is, plus the age of 10, plus the string years old. The thing is that we can only combine the same type of data together. So we can only combine strings with strings and integers with integers. We can't do strings and integers. And so what we're doing here is we're combining a bunch of strings with an integer. And Python obviously doesn't like that. It's not going to let you do that. So what we need to do is convert this to an actual string, just like that. Right? But we don't want to do it from here, because what if we want to actually add something to this value later on in the script? So we want the original variable to stay an integer, but down here maybe we can just temporarily turn it into a string. And so Python allows for us to do this using one of its built-in functions called str. So what I'm going to do is type in str, open parentheses, and enclose this in parentheses itself. And what this does is anything that's in between these parentheses gets converted from whatever data type, an integer or a float, it gets converted into a string. So now what it's done is it's taken age and it's turned it into a string, just like that. Well, not like that, just like that. And so now when we try and run this, we should be good. And we got Alex is 10 years old. Now the same way, so if I have another variable down here, actually no, that's fine. If I actually do have this in quotes and I wanted to turn it into an integer, Python also has a built-in function called int. So if we put in age like this, it's going to turn this 10 into an actual integer, just like that. And so that's good. That's good to know for later on. So there are other operations within Python that you can use. So we can do stuff like print 4 minus 5, and we'll get -1. Multiplication is the asterisk key right there, so that's going to multiply the two values to get 20. We can also divide by using the /. That's going to give us something. There's also something called the modulo operator, which is just a %sign. And what this does, if we run it, it gives us 4. So whenever you divide two of the numbers, whatever the remaining value is, it's going to give you. So if we do something like 12 modulo 6, we get 0. Because when you divide 12 and 6, 6 goes into 12 evenly, and so there's no remainder. But if we do something like 12 and 5, we get 2. And that's because we get 2.4. And so Python's going to round down just to yield the value of 2 in this case. We'll get into some use cases as to why this is useful, because it does have certain applications within programming. And so that concludes this episode about variables and data types. These are all the basics. And so next episode we'll get into it a little deeper and more into manipulating certain variables and values. With that being said, until next time.